On the 13th of March 2023, the White House announced the visit to Africa by United States Vice President Kamala Harris. The Vice President was scheduled to travel to Zambia, Tanzania, and Ghana from 25th March to 2nd April 2023. Her visit was meant to build on the recent U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit that President Joe Biden hosted in Washington in December 2022. The U.S. Vice President's visit was also meant to strengthen United States partnerships with Africa and advance its shared efforts on security and economic prosperity. As expected, on 31st March 2023, the U.S. Vice President, who was accompanied by her husband, landed at Kenneth Kaunda International Airport in Lusaka, Zambia, amidst tight security. She was received by Zambia's Vice President, Mutale Nalumango. Her stepping on the Zambian soil was certainly so refreshing as it holds her childhood memories of her stay in Zambia 6 decades ago. Miss Harris was in Zambia in the 1960s when she visited her grandfather as a little girl who lived in the capital of Lusaka as an Indian public servant. The Vice President's first stop on her menu was a visit to State House, the country's highest public office which houses the office of the Republican President Hakainde Hichilema. The two leaders held a press conference where she, among other issues, announced her landmark visit to Panuka Farm the following day. The farm practices smart agriculture in an effort to adapt to the effects of climate change, which has had devastating impacts on the country's agriculture sector.
The President and I also discussed extensively the issue of the climate crisis, and I thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership there as well. You have begun innovative public-private partnerships to focus on protecting forests and to protect and rewild landscapes, which will of course increase biodiversity and sequester carbon. The United States is committed to these types of innovative solutions to support climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. In fact, tomorrow I will visit a farm outside of Lusaka to announce $7 billion in public-private sector investments for this continent.
The visit by Miss Harris to Panuka Farm was preceded by intensive preparations in terms of cleanups of the farm premises as security operations to ensure all was in place for the high-level dignitary. The 4-kilometer gravel stretch from Mungule Road had to be patched up, while 2-kilometer part of the road was also graveled with support from partners from the U.S. Embassy in Zambia and Zambia National Service. And on Saturday, 1st April 2023, all roads led to Panuka Farm located in Chiwombo district in the outskirts of the capital of Lusaka. Business came to a standstill as multitudes of people gathered along the Great North Road and other roads in the city wanting to catch a glimpse of her motorcade as it made its way to Panuka Farm. Her arrival into Panuka Farm can best be likened to the triumphal entry of Jesus in Jerusalem as her motorcade gracefully rolled into position at the Panuka Farm offices. Mr. Bruno Mwemba, the managing director and founder of Panuka Farm, was already in position to welcome the Vice President after what may be construed as the farm's greatest corporate litmus test. The task ahead for Mr. Mwemba was evidently mammoth, but it appears his military background came in handy as he appeared to be resolute and calm like a soldier awaiting inspection by a superior officer on the parade square. Moments after the motorcade swung into position, the Vice President's security team finally opened the massive doors of the Chevrolet Suburban, upon which she was graciously received and greeted by Mr. Mwemba. As part of the initial greetings, Mr. Mwemba took a moment to quickly explain to the Vice President the farm setup and history. In resonance with the Vice President's efforts to expand access to the digital economy, her first stop was a chat with the founders of Lupia, a fintech which provides online loans and other investment products such as peer-to-peer lending. Mr. Mwemba then led the Vice President to her second stop on the farm with a walking explanation anchored on the farm's deliberate consciousness to climate adaptation and biodiversity conservation in the design and running of the farming enterprise. According to the statistics highlighted in Zambia's national strategy to reduce deforestation and forest degradation, Zambia has an estimated deforestation rate of 250,000 to 300,000 hectares per year. One of the leading drivers of deforestation in Zambia is agricultural expansion as farmers seek to use land intensification as a proxy to increase their yields, which unfortunately exacerbates deforestation. One of the Vice President's objectives for this visit to Africa was to advance efforts towards climate adaptation and resilience. Her visit to Panuka Farm was thus in sync with her objectives, which partly was also meant to appreciate how small pieces of land can best be utilized to farm commercially without cutting more trees to increase farming areas through adoption of climate-proofing technologies. In the quest for the Vice President to appreciate one of the low-cost production environments used on the farm to adapt to the effects of excess heat and sun, Mr. Mwemba led the Vice President to her second stop at the farm of a 2,000 square meters shade net housing some sweet peppers and iceberg lettuce. Whilst shade nets may not offer the kind of climate-proofing capabilities offered by greenhouses, shade nets are useful in the agricultural sector to protect crops from temperature extremes, strong winds, frost, hail, and pests. Besides appreciating the climate benefits of growing horticulture farming products in the shade net, the Vice President also took time to meet a youth, a female field supervisor. She apparently was part of the maiden Panuka Farm graduate trainee program that took place in 2021 and later was employed as a field supervisor at Panuka Farm. The Vice President later proceeded to visit a number of greenhouses where crops ranging from sweet peppers, English cucumber, and iceberg lettuce are grown. In the process, she also met some of the youths working at Panuka Farm as part of the technical management team. A notable feature of her visit to the various greenhouses was what later turned out to be a social media frenzy where one of the Panuka Farm field supervisors gave the U.S. Vice President what was described as the best form of greeting elders. Various media houses in Zambia took turns to post about this famous handshake. In the quest to also appreciate the genesis of the farm and some of the open field production at Panuka Farm, Mr. Mwemba led the Vice President to an open field at the back of the greenhouse complex. At this outdoor field, he took time to explain the rationale behind the various growing environments depending on the season of the year. Mr. Mwemba further explained that due to the floods that characterized the rainy season, all the production of iceberg lettuce was migrated to greenhouses to avoid production losses induced by floods. Mr. Mwemba also took time to explain to the U.S. Vice President about the irrigation setup, which includes use of drip irrigation, a water tank used as a path-through for water during irrigation, as well as the solar system used to pump water underground for irrigation. After the field tour, it was now time for the U.S. Vice President to deliver her speech. On the way to delivering the speech, Mr. Mwemba took time to explain to the U.S. Vice President some of the ongoing climate-proofing activities, notably water harvesting from the rooftops of the greenhouses whose water will be channeled to an underground reserve tank. From a climate change perspective, rainwater harvesting helps to reduce the electricity that would otherwise be needed for pumping water from underground boreholes. Mr. Mwemba also took time to explain to the U.S. Vice President how the harvested water will later be available for irrigation during the dry season when the underground water aquifers dry up. Such a technology helps to conserve groundwater for future use. Just before he invited the U.S. Vice President to deliver her remarks, Mr. Mwemba explained the meaning of the farm name Panuka.
Some of you may actually be wondering what Panuka really means. So for those of you that are not from here, Panuka is the word from the southern part of this country for a tribe that's called Tonga. So Panuka is literally translated as being clever. But from some perspective, you can actually say being innovative and trying new things. And that's exactly why we've done what we do here, I think in resonance with that Panuka concept.
Mr. Mwemba later explained that one of the hallmarks of Panuka Farm's operations is the fact the farm is 100% running on solar power for all its operations, ranging from pumping water, cold storage, office operations, and running of the chicken run.
Over the years, we have done just that. People said we couldn't run the farm on solar, and apparently we actually still have quite a lot of people that say solar doesn't work, you can't run a commercial enterprise. But we think this, is a testimony of what exactly can happen. So we certainly proved them wrong.
In her remarks, U.S. Vice President expressed her delight on the technology advancement adopted by Panuka Farm to improve its crop productivity.
A lot of what you are doing here is about high tech, using cell phone apps to track plant health and using solar energy to power buildings and irrigation systems. Bruno showed me on his phone the app that he has been using over the last 2 years so that he can use the camera on his phone to take a picture of the leaf of a plant. And the app will then tell him, because of AI and what it has been programmed to do, oh, there are certain kinds of infestation that are hurting that plant. That plant needs a certain kind of food to address whatever might be harming it. That plant needs less water, more water, less sun, less sun. Think about the application of technology that can grow the productivity of farms, which increases the food supply in any particular area. So what is so exciting about this is the intersection between technology, innovation, how we think of water policy. Bruno has shown me what you are doing around water conservation, building trenches so that they can then feed when the rains do come into the reservoir you've built here to anticipate what might be future drought. This is exciting, innovative work.
Ms. Harris also took advantage of her visit on the Zambian soil to announce over $7 billion in private sector and U.S. government commitments to promote climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation across Africa.
This work then that we are doing with the private sector, as I announced yesterday, will, because of the work that I've done to help generate more than $7 billion in private sector commitments, will support climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. This includes commitments to support climate-smart agriculture, to increase access to financing and insurance, which is a very big deal, to more on this continent than 116 million farmers, which is about half of the farmers on the continent.
After her 2-hour interaction at Panuka Farm, the U.S. Vice President and her entourage finally said their goodbyes, leaving the workers with a lifetime story which they will forever cherish.
This visit means a lot. As a farm, it means that our being acknowledged as a country and internationally. And personally, it was really a pleasure talking to the Vice President and hosting the Vice President at our farm.
This experience has put the farm on map. It's there, it will be used as a model here in Zambia for smaller farmers who are just yet to start, who are planning to get in the agriculture sector. So it will be a model. They will be like, okay, Panuka Farm did it, so even us, we can do it.
This visit was an indication that the American government recognizes the effects of climate change on agriculture. So we were actually very privileged to receive the Vice President to showcase our climate-smart agriculture practices. That way we are able to show to others what we are doing and see, hopefully they are able to replicate what we are doing, and then at least to be able to combat the issues of climate change on agriculture.
And Mr. Mwemba, popularly known as Mr. Panuka in the farming circles, wrapped up the significance of this important visit with an appreciation to the U.S. Vice President for her invaluable time spent at the farm to appreciate the smart agriculture being practiced by one of Zambia's horticulture farms.
So one other aspect that also the Vice President, came to appreciate here is this concept of, the food, water and energy nexus. I think food security, is a topical issue on the Vice President's agenda. And so the food, water and energy, nexus is one thing that kind of plays out here at Panuka Farm in our smallness. So with food security, you want to make sure that if you're land constrained, you can still, beef up your production within that, small given land area. And then the second piece, which is the water, bit as well. We are aware that some of the water aquifers are actually kind of running low. And what you want is to deploy some of the, climate, adaptation technologies when it comes to irrigation so that you're a bit more efficient in the water use. So we were also showcasing some of the, irrigation techniques, obviously drip and a few other, techniques on how we kind of a water efficient use, farm. And then the third piece, which is actually also a very critical component, is actually energy within that, food, energy and water nexus. You may be aware that we're actually 100% off-grid, farming enterprise here. When we started this enterprise around 2017, I think that was a time when Zambia was hit by one of the worst, forms of, load shedding. And then we conceptualized this farm, wanting to actually debunk the myth that you can't use solar to run, a commercial farming enterprise. We are aware that obviously for the large, commercial, farming enterprises, probably solar might be a bit too much. But I think for the kind of, setup that we're in, which is probably what most of the farmers are found into 1 to about 5, hectare farming enterprises, we feel this is another model that we could, showcase out there to some of the emerging farmers that, solar can actually do it. And here we are, almost 7 years running 100% on solar. It's a pity, I think we still see, on social media, people still debunking whether this model works. And that's exactly, again, what the US Vice President came to see, whether this is something that we could deploy, commercially. And I think she got to see that here.
The visit to Panuka Farm by the US Vice President has undoubtedly left a landmark history for being one of the leading pioneers in mainstreaming climate change, biodiversity conservation, and land degradation ethos in its farm design and day-to-day operations.